for quorum. This is the fourth hearing. We need to draw an end to this chapter. By today, we need to write up a report, so if there are follow-up questions, that you should do so in writing. Yes, Chairman, I very much agree that this should be our last meeting. But Chairman, perhaps you should give directions to officers attending this meeting. Please ask them to answer questions directly to speed up the process. I think we haven't touched on issue 4. So let's do our best. I don't think we should dwell on case 1 anymore. We've spent too much time on it. So how about we jump to part 4 first, Chairman? Because about case 1, I suppose they would go back, retrieve some information for answering our questions. So how about we go to part 4 first? Thank you. Secretary, welcome. This is the 4th hearing, and also welcome Mr. Wong, SG. I hope to conclude the hearing today, and we'll tie loose ends by written questions. Second, please answer our questions directly so that we can pick up the speed. All right, let's begin. Kenneth. Let's start with part 4. Please refer us to the relevant parts. All right, let's now move on to governance issues. If you've listened or watched similar hearings before, the crux of the issues relating to governance are mostly related to the number of participants to a meeting, the frequency of meetings, declaration of interest, etc. So how about table 22? That's estimated, well, first of all, in English version, that's page 87, table 22. Right, please turn to page 87 of the English version. We have the committees under the SFNOC. We have, for example, the HKADC, the Hong Kong Olympic Academy. We have the number of meetings held between the 30th of March 2017 and 31st of December 2019 during the 2-year period. We have the Membership Affairs Committee holding a so-so number of meetings. No problem. But for a number of committees below, namely the Hong Kong Olympic Academy, Olympic House Management Committee, no meeting had been held during the 2-year period. I can't believe there had been no problem at all for the Olympic House during the 2-year period, and also Public Relations and Cooperation Communication Committee. So I would ask the SFNOC to explain about the 0 meeting held during that period. Secretary General Mr. Wong. How about you start with Hong Kong Olympic Academy? Can you first explain the function of Hong Kong Olympic Academy? The function of the Hong Kong Olympic Academy is to promote the spirit of Olympism as put forward by the IOC, and the Hong Kong Olympic Academy had run classes before on the same subject. We do admit that over the past few years, the chairman of the committee appointed was a professor. He was quite busy, and we admit that we did not call for more frequent meetings. Mr. Chang, Chairman, about the number of meetings falling short of the estimated number for these committees, let me supplement. Like Mr. Wong said, the IOC requires each SFNOC to set up an academy. And we also have an information center relating to the Olympian spirit. So the Hong Kong Academy, Olympic Academy is tasked to operate this center. So this academy runs classes in schools to promote the spirit. But it's true that during the 2-year period or the 9-month period, no meeting were held. 2 years and a 9-month period. Let me first ask a question about this period. How many activities were organized by the academy? Do you have a list? Despite 0 meeting, did they run any courses? If the answer is yes, do you have a list? Mr. Chang, over the past 2 years and 9 months, papers were circulated to all members, including overseas programs for approval and recommendations for athletes to take part in them. 7 papers in total. We also organized tours for students to visit the Olympic House. We also organize and arrange for ambassadors to pay overseas duty visits. We can provide a list to Mr. Leung in due course. To the Public Accounts Committee, please. For the Olympic House Management Committee, again, we agree that no meeting had been held during the 33-month period. Because on top of the Olympic House Management Committee, there is also the board, and matters were referred to the board for approval. Some matters were discussed by the board, including redevelopment of the Olympic House and also major maintenance and repair. On a quarterly basis or on a 3-month basis, we provide reports to the Home Affairs Bureau and consult them on matters relating to the Olympic House. If you have the board, do we still need this management committee in the future? Mr. Chang, I subscribe to Mr. Leung's views. We're going to review the composition of these committees. We will recommend scrapping some of the duplicating committees. Well, he didn't ask for it to be scrapped. He asked whether we need to have this committee in the future. I asked Olympic House Management Committee in particular. I didn't ask about the other 2. Since you have the board, what will be the role of this committee in the future? Do you think we can streamline the structure? Can you specifically answer the question on Olympic House Management Committee? Mr. Chang, please explain the existence of this Olympic House Management Committee. What's its role? Because the board also hold meetings. You need to explain why we need this committee. The Olympic House is under your charge on the expense of the public coffers. Understood. Like Mr. Leung said, in terms of reference, the Olympic House Management Committee duplicates with the board, and in the future, our work will be rationalized. The board will be in charge of long-term development of the Olympic House, whereas day-to-day management will be overseen by the Olympic House Management Committee. Regular meetings will be held.
Moving on, About the Public Relations and Corporate Communication Committee, what's the situation with that committee, Mr. Chang? For this particular committee, over the 2 years and 9 months under audit, no meeting was held. Here's the reason. Most of the members are also members on the board of officers. For public relations, corporate communications, these matters are already discussed at the board level. So members believed they wouldn't have to hold extra meetings for those matters. This will be part of the review as to whether we still need to keep this committee around. How about this? Give us a list of officers for these committees, showing how many of these committee members are also board members. Tell us the terms of reference, their responsibilities, terms of reference of the board of officers. The terms of reference of board members and committee members should be distinct from one another because the board is supposed to provide oversight. That's what good governance means, Mr. Chang. It's like you're setting up and disbanding a committee at will. So this is not how you go about governance. For sure, we look at the way forward, but we also need to find out why no meeting was held. Just to elaborate here, apart from the Public Relations and Corporate Communication Committee, there's another committee affiliated with it, performing similar roles. Every quarter, we publish a paper. The public relations work is also discussed in that committee. So there is some sort of overlap in the work done by different committees. This Public Relations and Corporate Communication Committee has been around for a long time, so we will be reviewing to see if there are ways to streamline the structure. Just to go back to the Hong Kong Olympic Academy. For the Olympic House Management Company, the functions have been consolidated and integrated. Now there are manpower and resource considerations. Given the similarity of some of the tasks, we're integrating some of the tasks. And going forward, we'll consider doing away with some of the committees. As for the corporate communication functions, we need to have someone to do the work. There will be a committee in charge of such functions. Deputy Chair Kenneth, I want to draw everyone's attention to your table 23. That's another table, a few pages later. Table 23. It says you have 15 committees in S7OC where it's about members who didn't attend any meetings for those 15 meetings. There are committee members. Quite a number of these committee members never attended any meetings. I'm assuming that you convened the meetings. A question for the Director of Audit. Is this correct? Chair, correct. We're only counting meetings that were convened by year. The 61 individual there, we're talking about whether a person the number of meetings attended by a person. Another question for the Director of Audit. In 2017, 24, 2018 and 19, 20 and 17 respectively, are we talking about the same person? So the same individuals not attending the meetings over the years. Director of Audit. Yes, we do see individuals not attending meetings for more than a year. But we didn't highlight these people in particular. A question for SF and OC. What's the terms of office of your committee members? When you renew their terms, do you consider their attendance on or a contribution on committees? What are the criteria for the renewal? And for these individuals who didn't attend any meetings, or if we just look at the year 2017, there are people who never attended a meeting. Have you followed up, Mr. Abraham Chang? For table 23, we look at the yearly breakdown. In 2017, 26%, 16% in 2018, 15% in 2019, the percentage of members who didn't attend meetings in that year. We see improvement in percentage terms over the years. So the reason that members didn't attend the committee meetings in Gen 1, we provide written information on that. It's in Gen 1, Table 1, Table 2, and Table 3. I want to focus on Table 3. In Table 3, covering the 2 years and 9 months, there were 15 committees. We assigned numbers to each member, 84 members in total. Look at the right-hand side, you will see 9 members attended no meetings at all. There's a note 1, they didn't attend meetings for 2 reasons. Some of them were athlete committees. These are established under requirements of the IOCs. Athlete committees are composed of current athletes and coaches. Very often they were out of town in overseas games or trainings. That's why their attendance rates were on the low side. As for members 7, 8, and 9, we elected a new group of members in 2018, and these members are no longer on the committees. Kenneth Leung's question asked you about the length of the terms of office, or the limits on the terms of office. For the government, the terms of office is some usually limited to 6 years. For these committees, the terms of office of these members depends on the committee itself. Sometimes it's 1 year, but for other committees, the term may be 4 years in length. General meetings held every 4 years, and then you have a new group of members. But in other cases, you have outstanding athletes or organizing committees for sports events. These terms are usually 1 year. You have 1-year terms and 4-year terms. Do we have other kinds of terms of office? No other. Yes, correct. There are no other kinds of term limits. Member number 4. 5 meetings. This member didn't attend any of them. Is this member still appointed as a member of other committees? In Table 3, member number 04. Chair. Just a bit more details. For member 04, is a lawyer, has a busy schedule. I'm also a lawyer. I'm sitting here for 4 years. You can explain away that. Shouldn't lawyers be good at time management? This member didn't attend any of the meetings, and this is no longer a member with us. You raised a question about the board. You said you have a board you have a board for the Olympic House management. Just show us for 2 or 3 meetings. Show us the agenda and the minutes of the board meetings, just for 2 or 3 meetings. Want to get a sense of how they manage the facilities like the Olympic House. And second, we need to know the terms of reference of these committees. Is there any duplication with the board? Is the board truly performing its governance function? Can you provide papers showing those information? For member number 1, for example, attend just 1 meeting. For members 2, 3, and 4, you have 9 board members who didn't attend any meetings at all. Mr. Abraham Chang, Chair. These are not board members, these are committee members. Whether board members or committee members, you say there's duplication. So some committee members are also board members. That's what you mean by duplication. You have to let us know what's going on. Someone sitting on the board performs governance functions. Chair. In table 3, these are all committee members. But I think some of them are also board members. No, none of them are board members. For table 2, I think there's this director who didn't attend the meeting, Director 01. We're talking about the board officers, their attendance at the 15 committees. Director 01 is an athlete representative. This member is an ex-official director on the board. There was 1 athlete committee meeting, but this athlete wasn't in town at the time. Hence, you see the 0 attendance in the table. Kenneth? Another question, touching on a different area. Conflict of interest. Declarations of conflict of interest. Audit report. Paragraph 4.19. Question for, or rather, it's something for the Director of Audit. Do you see a major issue with with declarations of conflict of interest? Director of Audit. Chair, it's a tough question. It's hard to say whether it's a major issue. Chair, we want to encourage good practices. So we go by the internal protocol of the organization for managing stuff like potential conflict of interest. In paragraph 4.19, there are clear rules laid down. In the Articles of Association, for example, some are found in the Code of Conduct. There's also a Code of Discipline. At the board level, there's a requirement about to declare conflicts of interest as early as possible. Once the interest is declared, then no participation, no voting is allowed at the meeting. At the committee level, there are different rules in place. There need to be rulings on declarations of interest. There has to go through discussions, justifications, follow-up actions. Everything has to be documented. These are the rules laid down within SF&OC. There is room for improvement. paragraph 4.28. For the board and the committees, interests were declared in 8 meetings. But in 4 committee meetings, the declarations were not documented in relation to the rulings and the discussion. In terms of documentation, there is room for improvement. It's hard to tell whether this is a major issue. Maybe an item is discussed, but then it's not documented, and there is no way of telling how that matter was dealt with at the time.
Chairman, just now the Director of Audit explained that if there was declaration of interest at the board relating to any direct or indirect pecuniary interest, then the director should not take part in the deliberation or the voting process. So why didn't the committee follow that practice? Why did they need deliberation and ruling? Who set the rules? And who should decide on how to handle conflict of interest at the committee after deliberation? Do we have a consistent policy across all committees, or should the committee chairperson make his own decision? Mr. Wong. Well, I fully agree with Mr. Leung, and we have all along been abiding by the relevant declarations of interest requirements, in particular where direct pecuniary interest is involved. As for the individual committee chairperson, well, of course, we need to enhance governance, requiring all of them to make such notification. Yes, we do require them. Yes, I myself definitely. But are there guidelines? Yes. Can we have a copy of the guidelines, please? Because, in my view, I don't think too much discretion should be given to the chairperson. Say, you can put it in black and white that if direct pecuniary interest is involved, then one should not vote or take part in the meeting. I remember in the last hearing, we referred to selection committees of other international sports organizations. Apart from interests involving direct pecuniary interest, say if family members are candidates in the selection process, then there is a serious conflict of interest that must be declared. I wonder if the SNOC will follow up on this matter, on how to handle this kind of conflict of interest. Mr. Wong, I agree 100% that if a family member is a candidate in the selection process, then the family member must withdraw himself from the process. But I understand that there are different kinds of sports, and family members of these athletes might very well be involved in the promotion of the sports all the way. I can think of at least 10 of them. We have committees with committee members or board members, and their family members will not participate in the process. That is, of course, very important when it comes to conflict of interest. We need to uphold the rules stringently, because at least for those promoting sports, their children might very well take part in the sports, not to mention being selected. Say in the Asian Games, some athletes participating in the Asian Games are also children of some members of the associations or committees. But the point is we need to avoid conflict of interest. Right, Mr. Wong, we're only suggesting that in terms of good governance, whether they should take part in it or whether they should at least declare it are two different things. We have the system of declaring interest so that we have transparency and level playing field. Of course, they have equal rights in participating in the sport. But if a family member is sitting on the selection committee, you should not give the perception of unfairness. That's the meaning of good governance. You shouldn't mix these two up. Well, Deputy Chair Mr. Leung asked specifically, selection committee. Right, selection committee, not participation in every kind. Whether or not your father is an office bearer or committee member, that's another thing. I'm just talking about selection. He asked a very specific question. I know you're very devoted to the sector, but please don't get confused. Right, to answer the question, yes? Mr. Wong, anything to add? We staunchly abide by the principle, and that is, if the athlete is in any way affiliated with the committee member or board member, then the member should withdraw himself from the selection process. Right, I know you're also a swimming athlete. And we do see on the record that you did not take part in the process. Just now the question was about whether there were other scenarios. That's why for good governance you need to set up a system. If the system is not consistently applied to each committee, if each committee sets up its own rules, then it won't do. Right, we standardize the process and we make sure that every committee follows our rules. I think that's all for me on part 4. Let's see if my other members have follow-up questions on governance. Yes, but before that, you should provide us with a number of things, minutes of the meetings and also agenda. Let us know what these 3 committees did and why 6 meetings were held, and according to your rule, each member should attend at least 3 meetings in a year, but then they had 0 attendance. So we need to know the work of the committees. Yes, it will be provided. You need to explain yourself that what you just said is true. Mr. Lam, I have no question about this part. All right, so you can go back to case 1 now. Thank you, Chairman. I think it's still fresh in the minds of members at the last hearing. I refer to page 24, or rather page 27 of the English version of the audit report, case 1D. That is, in terms of the selection criteria laid down by the SFNOC, the last criterion is NSA's preparation plans for the athletes, including training and competitions in the coming 6 months leading to the Asian Games. I also referred members to Gen 8, page 8, the handwritten page 8. Yes, please go on. Page 8, we have Mr. Wang Shunyan participating in men 50-meter breaststroke. The time was 31.65. And then of the 36 swimmers, he ranked 29th. And then we asked about this swimmer in the Asian Games, and subsequently we received another paper, Jan 12, Chairman. Jan 12. Nomination form relating to this athlete Wong. There is no page number here, I'm sorry, Chairman, but do we see that? After the nomination form for Yen Kin. Mr. Chang, Mr. Wong, have you located the page? Yes. Alright, and then for these athlete Wong, his result was very good. That's the nomination form. And then about the previous results, he scored some 28.66 seconds for 50-meter breaststroke. I understand that he was one of the best breaststroke swimmers in Hong Kong. However, this form did not mention anything about what I pointed out at the previous hearing. Despite being such an excellent swimmer, unfortunately, right before the Asian Games took place in August, in around May, unfortunately he had a serious accident leading to a serious bone fracture of the left leg, and also there was an open knee surgery on his left knee. And Mr. Chang, you may recall that I'd once asked questions relating to this athlete. He suffered such a serious injury right before the Asian Games, and he was selected. So isn't against the criterion of the preparation plan and training 6 months before the Asian Games. And Mr. Chang's answer at the time is that the SFNOC was not aware of the athlete's situation before the Asian Games. And then chairman immediately stopped him and asked him to refer to documents first. But from the paper submitted this time, I don't see anything relating to this case. That explains why just a few months before the Asian Games, the athlete suffered such serious injuries. And as a result, for 50-meter breaststroke, his result in the Asian Games was some 3 seconds slower than his personal best. A delay of 3 seconds probably isn't very desirable in the results of the Asian Games. So I would like the SFNOC to explain why, despite the serious injury suffered by the athlete, he was still allowed to take part in the Asian Games. Mr. Chang. To answer Mr. Lam's question, let me stress once again that regarding the injury suffered by athlete Wong, the head coach or the NSA did not inform the SFNOC. I understand that the Hong Kong ASA was not aware of his injuries either. And then I'm sorry, Chairman, I didn't catch him just now. The Hong Kong Sports Institute did not inform the SFNOC, nor did it inform the HKASA. So the HKASA and the SFNOC were not aware of the athlete's injuries. The head coach for swimming events then wrote in and explained about the injuries. The letter can be submitted to the PAC in due course. I have redacted the names of individuals involved. Can we make photocopies, please? Yes. Please continue, Mr. Chang. The head coach mentioned in the letter that the athlete suffered injuries in May, And then the HKSI had the 2 specialists treating, and also the physiotherapist treating the athlete. They were of the view that the athlete could recover in time, and then the head coach discussed the matter with the athlete, and then the head coach made a professional judgment and decided that the athlete could take part in the event.
Mr. Lam, Chair. You were trying to ask a follow-up questions. Your questions focus on an athlete who was not selected. Now I'm trying to draw a comparison here. SFNOC was supposed to be aware of what happened 6 months before the Asian Games. That's what I gathered from your reply to Mr. Lam, the previous hearing. And Mr. Ronnie Wong quoted from a letter from a head coach. Why wasn't this case covered? Chair, I want to focus on certain procedures. I want clarification on these matters. I'm trying to draw a similarity. I want to get the chronology right. This athlete was injured in May 2018. Was he already on the nomination list? Correct. Correct. That means after he was nominated, he was injured. The head coach at HKSI informed neither SFOC nor the HKASA. Is that correct? Correct, Chairman. Can you give us the dates? We need these for the PAC report. Chair, you need to get them to provide you with a date. When was his nomination form submitted? The nomination form was submitted towards the end of March 2018. Injury was on the 2nd of May 2018. It wasn't until then Mr. Lam brought this up that we checked with the HSI and then we found out what happened. Chairman, I found this shocking. It's common sense. An athlete suffered injuries that required operation on the knee and metal implants for part of his leg. He would struggle even with walking, let alone the intensive training. We're talking about the bone injuries. It takes a long time, and there is a risk of atrophy of the muscles. The physiotherapy also takes time. We're not even talking about high-intensive training. It would be very difficult for the athlete. I find it mind-boggling that the SFNOC had no idea what happened. Which swimming club did this athlete belong to? Mr. Abraham Chang or Mr. Ronald? He belongs to the Hoi Tin Swimming Association. Hoi Tin Swimming Club. Mr. Ronnie Wong, are you also the person in charge of the Hoi Tin Swimming Club? I'm honorary president. Are you also a director of Hoi Tin Club? Mr. Lam, I am not in charge of Hoi Tin's operation. I'm asking you, are you a director of Hoi Tin Swimming Association? No, I'm not. Clear? I'm just an honorary president, so you don't take part in day-to-day operation of Hoi Tin. No, I don't. Chair. This athlete was injured. Did the Hoi Tin Swimming Club report the matter to the Hong Kong Amateur Swimming Association, or HKASA? Chair, the HKASA or the SFOC we weren't aware of the injury of this athlete until Mr. Lam brought up. So after last week's hearing, we checked with HASI and HAASA. Chair, just then Mr. Ronnie Wong said he wasn't a director of the of Hoi Tin Swimming Club. I have the company search results here. In 2016, covers 2016. Mr. Ronnie Wong was a director at the organization, Mr. Ronnie Wong Manchu. I'm an honorary. Mr. Wong, I asked you if you were a director, or maybe I misunderstood the question, but I didn't take part in the day-to-day operation of Hoi Tin Swimming Club. So now you can recall that you were a director of Hoi Tin. Now that you've refreshed my memory, I can recall it now. Chair. Mr. Ronnie Wong, can you explain this? Whether you're honorary chairman and director, what are the differences between these roles? I'm trying to give you an opportunity to explain yourself. Sometimes you're given a position, but do you play any role in the club? I don't take part in the operations. I take part in maybe the annual dinners. As to the day-to-day running of the organization, it's up to the officers inside the club. I was a chair at one point, but then I stepped down, and then the running wasn't something I wasn't in charge of. There were maybe 20, a number of the honorary chair. Mr. Ronnie Wong said he was the chairman at one point, but that was an honorary. Yes, but that was many years ago. As we understand, a director in the context of a company has a duty to manage a company, can't just deny any knowledge of Hoi Tin's operation. For the case of Mr. Wang Chunyang, I have no knowledge of what was happening. Chair, just then Mr. Abraham Chang said the HKSI's coach didn't inform the SFNOC or the HKASA of the athlete's injury. Mr. Ronnie Wong, do you think this case should have been reported to the SFNOC and ASA by this coach? The HKSI is operated on its own. Injuries are matters within the HKSI's purview. It operates in an autonomous way. Chair, so Mr. Ronnie Wong was saying that the head coach had no duty to report such serious injury to the SFNOC. Mr. Ronnie Wong, we didn't make it a requirement for the head coach to make a report. After the previous PAC hearing, I met with this coach involved. The coach looked into this matter with the physician and the physiotherapist. They believe this athlete would recover and take part in the games. I am neither the coach nor the physician, so I'm not in a position to judge whether they made the right call at the time. But these professionals, the coach, the physicians, as the documents suggest, the athlete received medical attention, and the doctor certified that the athlete would recover and take part in the games. And in fact, the athlete took part in the games. Chair, the SFNOC was supposed to select the athlete. By early May 2018, the SFNOC didn't finalize the list of participants yet. From the last meeting, could you just let him finish with the reply? When did you make the final decision for the selection? Was it late May 2018? Mr. Abraham Chang? Chair, we submitted the final list of participants to the Asian Olympic Organizing Committee on the 30th June 2018. The injury occurred in May 2018, but you submitted the final list of nominated athletes in late June 2018. During the selection process, the athlete unfortunately suffered injuries during the selection process, injuries to the knee, and had to undergo operations. I put a straightforward question, a specific question to Mr. Ronnie Wong, that he, as the Secretary General of the SFOC, the question was, does he think this coach of the HKSI have a duty to report the matter, the injury, to the SFNOC, especially the selection committee? Let's bear in mind that the requirement I just quoted, the SFNOC is supposed to take into account preparation of the athlete in the 6 months leading to the Asian Games. This athlete suffered a leg injury. This ought to have been a factor in consideration. Did the coach of HKSI have a duty to report the injury? Yes or no? Mr. Ronnie Wong. We didn't see that injury coming. Athletes sustain injuries during training, during sports games. That happens. But in this case, we acknowledge it's serious. The coach was supposed to take care of the matter. If the athlete was in so bad a state as to be unable to attend Asian Games, and the coach would have a duty to inform us of what happened. But the SFOC is also supposed to select the athletes. You should be aware of what happened. You can't just say that the coach didn't tell us. Say an athlete is not chosen, we will let other athletes in. Let's talk about I want to talk about first time. We never eliminate anyone. For example, the athletes who didn't get selected by the SFNOC, they were nominated, but they were not chosen. Chair, Mr. Ronnie Wong said the doctors certified that the athlete could take part in the games, so the head coach decided to let the athlete go ahead with the games. I raised this question to Mr. Wong three times already. I got this impression that the head coach of HKSI didn't inform the HKASA or the SFNOC. And the impression is that Mr. Ronnie Wong was okay with it, but he apparently didn't say that the coach should have told the selection committee. Am I correct? Could you repeat what you said, Mr. Lam? You believe, in this case, the coach, knowing that the athlete sustained a serious injury, but then went on to let the athlete take part in the games without reporting the injury to the SFNOC selection committee. Do you agree with this decision, Mr. Ronnie Wong? Looking back, Mr. Lam, let him answer the question. I want to say in retrospect. You said you didn't know what happened back then, so we want to talk about now in retrospect. Can you answer his question? At this point, looking back, do you believe the coach made the right decision or not? What do you think should have been done? There's no yes or no answer to this question. Hear me out. The coach and the doctors knew the status of the athlete. If they thought the athlete was able to go ahead with the games, then we wouldn't make it a requirement for the coach to report what happened. Mr. Ronnie Wong, what happened happened. The coach made the decision, the doctors provided the advice, but the fact remains that the athlete was injured. The coach should have informed you of what happened, and then the decision should have rested with you. If you didn't know what happened, then how could you arrive at a fair decision, a reasonable decision? The question from Mr. Lam is that you're the Secretary General occupying a key position. What's your view on this matter? And then you just told us there is no yes or no. What happened happened. Do you understand that? So in that case, any injury sustained by the athletes would have to be reported to us.
It's not about any minor scratches or wounds. We're talking about major surgery. Even if the doctor says okay, then the doctor should be even more responsible for uttering okay. And that's all the more reason for them to inform you of what happened and the doctor's decision so that you could make an informed choice. Chairman, I'm really aghast at Mr. Wong's replies. Well, please let me finish. I'm talking fact, and I'm really shocked at his version of the fact, because the selection committee of the SFNOC, whilst in the selection process, we had this athlete who had unfortunately broken his leg. He couldn't even walk. He couldn't even get himself out of bed, let alone swimming. And then for Mr. Wong to say something like he questions whether it is necessary to inform them of every injury sustained by the athlete. But then, indeed, the doctor certified that this athlete could recover and swim. But we're not talking about recreational swimming as a therapy in any private housing estate. We're talking about the elite games, the Asian Games for elite athletes representing Hong Kong. Yes, he did swim, but his result was 3 seconds lower than his personal record. That's really unfortunate. Please pause here. Isn't it just common sense? Well, we shouldn't just look at the result of athletes. I think the spirit of sports isn't about winning all the time. You can't put the question that way. You can only ask about facts. Indeed, he was injured, and that the selection committee should be informed so that with this knowledge, they could decide whether he would give the chance to the athlete. Well, I will draw a line here. I'm not going to debate with you. I'm not trying to debate with you, Chairman. I'm just following the report. All along, I have been referring to criterion 1B in case 1, the training competitions in the coming 6 months, etc. I am only saying that you shouldn't criticize his result. I'm not going to engage in an argument with you. You're putting words in my mouth. No, I'm not criticizing him, because he talked about the results being 3 seconds lower. That's objective fact. That's objective fact. But who are you to criticize him? You are not a swimmer. But in that case, we don't need to hold the public hearing any longer. Right? You don't need to answer his question. The spirit of sports isn't about doing his personal best all the time. Somebody wins, somebody loses. That's not important. It's participation that's important. Don't criticize him. No, I'm not criticizing him. I am asking about the selection process and that it is wrong. Right, this criterion may be wrong, but you cannot criticize the result of the athlete. I need to lay out the objective facts to make my point. Right, but I've said it many times. That's the result. He tried his best. All right, I heard you, Chairman. In the previous 2 or 3 hearings, Mr. Chang and his team said many times, I don't know whether you recall, Chairman, that in selecting an athlete, they would look at the form of the athlete and the situation. Right, please. Of course, you allow me to go on. Well, all along, they said that they would look at the form of the athlete. And in fact, I was referring to Kwok Ha-Fai's case, and that if the result was not good, according to them, they'd rather leave the they rather not field the candidate for the games instead of having somebody performing really poorly. That's what they said. But they referred to a letter from the head coach. There was no training in the past 6 months for that case. You shouldn't be selective. No, I was just referring to their answer, and I want to pursue which set of criteria they were indeed following. I'm asking them to clarify. Right, but we need to be fair. You pick this example, athlete Kwok, and they already explained to us why they didn't pick Kwok. And then you could ask about the same set of criteria and different outcome. Can you explain why you didn't follow the criteria? Mr. Wong. Well, you referred us to point D, but D was just one of the criteria. For athlete Wong, well, if he had been able to achieve his personal best, he could have ranked much higher, and indeed he had done so before. So when the doctor said he could recover in time for the games, and indeed he had, even if he hadn't suffered any injury, the swimming result varied for athletes each time. But you shouldn't say that, Mr. Wong. The point is, they didn't inform you of the doctor's opinion, how he certified he could swim. Because not until he asked a question did you say that you learned the doctor's certificate. And he was asking why you weren't informed, but you failed to answer him. I'm not going to allow a quarrel here, but indeed his question was very clear. He was picked without the SF and OC having been informed of the situation, and you should not argue with him on this. You only learned about the doctor's opinion afterwards. Mr. Lam. Well, Mr. Wong at one point referred to some doctor's records. He said that those are available, but that he didn't know. Well, when the doctor said he could swim, did the doctor mean something like recreational swimming or a high-intensity game as in Asian Games? Because training would be required. I'm not criticizing the swimmer, Chairman, but for this swimmer to suffer such serious injuries to resume training, I wonder if there would be any impact on his injury, because I suffered a fracture before as a result of an assault, and the doctor told me not to engage in high-intensity activities. And for bones to fuse, it takes 5 weeks. The injury took place in May. Asian Games was held in August. So should the athlete be asked to resume such high-intensity training for the Games? Would it be good for the swimmer? So please answer very clearly, Mr. Wong, when you said the doctor said it was all right for him to swim. If you didn't know at the time, just tell us, Mr. Wong. Don't tell us with information you have now, because if you didn't know at the time, then would you think it was all right or not? No, Chairman, that's not what I mean. I want him to answer my question first because I think he's getting confused. Mr. Wong. The doctor examined his injuries, knowing that he was to take part in the Asian Games, not just ordinary swimming. But doctor's opinion is something else, Mr. Wong. It's your job to choose an athlete for the Games. When you knew about the doctor's certificate, then shouldn't you know more about the situation before selecting this athlete? Mr. Wong, dial back and look at the whole thing with what you knew at the time. Otherwise, it's really a waste of time to engage in a quarrel. All right, then I shouldn't do that. So answer him. Because we want to find a way forward. I mean, in the future, shouldn't you be informed if, something like this happens? Say if an athlete suffers injuries, you mean, in the future, then all injuries should be reported to us, and that's the only way? Chairman, my question was this. Mr. Wong just now said, after the last hearing, he said he sought an understanding with the head coach. He hadn't known this before, so he learned that from me, and then he got an understanding from the head coach, and according to the coach, the doctor said it was all right for the athlete to swim. And then Mr. Wong said his understanding was that definitely the doctor was aware of the athlete's upcoming Asian Games. But that's just his subjective opinion. He didn't ask the head coach to provide a proper record with a report explaining why, despite the serious injuries, the athlete should still be allowed to go ahead in the Asian Games. So that's just his opinion. That may not be the actual fact. So Mr. Wong, after the athlete was injured, how did the head coach handle the matter? And also, how the doctor opined that he could continue to take part in the Asian Games, and that in your belief that was right. Can you provide records for our reference? Mr. Wong or Mr. Chang? Yes. Let me go through the salient points of the doctor's letter to you. This one? The head coach Chan said in the middle of the letter that the left calf of the athlete was injured in the middle of the night on the 1st of May, and then an operation was carried out in the Eastern Hospital. He was discharged on the 5th of June, and then this Dr. Chan from the Eastern Hospital said he could recover fully in 3 months. And then from 7th of May onwards, he continued to recuperate in the Hong Kong Sports Institute. And then on 9th of May, he consulted Dr. Chang, and then he consulted another orthopedic surgeon in the Hong Kong SI on the 16th, Dr. Yong, and both doctors opined that he should be able to recover in 12 weeks and resume training without injury. And then for athlete Wong, he received follow-up treatments from the doctors at HKSI every Wednesday and also resumed recovery training. And then starting from the 1st of June, with the assistance of the physiotherapists of HKSI, he resumed aquatic training and also fitness training for his muscles. Meanwhile, views were exchanged between the doctors at the HKSI and the Eastern Hospital, and the physiotherapists, and also told the coach that the bones could fuse in 10 to 12 weeks and that he could participate in the Asian Games and he should be actively preparing for the Games. Having considered the professional opinions of these doctors, he decided to continue to take part in the Games. And every day before setting off for the Asian Games, athlete Wong had been actively participating in the therapies and the training for the Games. He worked extra hard, and basically he returned to the institute every day for physiotherapy and training, and he would train the upper body because of the injury suffered in the lower half, and he was persistent in carrying out training despite the injuries and the pain he suffered. In the end, both the athlete and the coach agreed for the athlete to continue to take part in the Games.
This is the letter provided by the coach afterward. Then if this letter was actually sent to you back then we wouldn't have to be talking about this matter here. If you knew about this letter back then and you were touched by what happened, and you would have let him go ahead, but you didn't know back then. You have laid down the 4 criteria here, and Mr. Lam kept pressing with the questions about the criteria. The problem is you didn't know what happened back then, and now you are justified trying to explain what happened back then. You didn't do your job as the gatekeepers back then. Why were you not aware of what happened back then? That's what Mr. Lam's question was about. I am letting him ask these questions. He shouldn't criticize an athlete's performance, because that's personally disparaging. But questions of facts like these. Let's look at what happened step by step. What makes you think you did the right thing, Mr. Ronnie Wong? Now, we didn't have this piece of information back then in 2018. I can't speculate what we would have done had we received this letter at that time. But going forward in future selections, we will ask all athletes to submit their medical records in the latest 6-month period. Chair. Mr. Ronnie Wong was the director of Hoi Swimming Club, the Secretary General of the S7OC, chair of the selection committee, and this athlete, the injured athlete, also belonged to the Hoi Swimming Club with a serious injury. Mr. Ronnie Wong, such a key figure with a role to the S7OC and the selection committee, and he was kept in the dark. That's what he was trying to say. He was kept in the dark. He had no idea of what happened. This serious incident happened to athlete, affecting the athlete's performance. I find it unacceptable. We have to look at this in the context of the selection criteria. This also goes against this very criterion about making reference to the training, the status of the athlete 6 months before the Asian Games. Now, looking back in retrospect, as Mr. Abraham Chang said, this athlete put in a great deal of work. He managed to take part in the game. He didn't do as well as he could have done, but then we should have let him take part in the games. Here's what I think about this whole incident. I think members of the public may have questions. Is it because the athlete belonged to the Hoi Swimming Club? I know that this coach also has ties with the Hoi Swimming Club, family members involved in the club, children belong to the club. Is it because it's all this special treatment? Is this all this special treatment the result of the connections with Hoi Swimming Club? The coach could have substituted another swimmer for the injured athlete. The other athlete may not be as top-notch as Mr. Wong. This Mr. Wong, the swimmer, is in tip-top form for the short event. If this swimmer, the Mr. Wong, could have waited for full recovery and then achieve something for Hong Kong, wasn't there any alternative plans for injured athletes? After I aired everything in the previous hearings, there were people in the sports sector wondering, and they're saying, shouldn't there have been a new selection mechanism? Wouldn't it make more sense to have a substitute athlete? Or maybe you can say it's the participation that mattered. The ranking comes second. Once he has all the facts, he can say something like this. The people selecting the athletes different from those making the judgment calls. You could have rows over this incident. Why is it that a certain athlete apparently exempt from the criterion laid out in 1D? You need to clarify this matter. Otherwise, you should have included a fifth criterion, humanitarian considerations, the effort put in by the athlete. Otherwise, you give the impression that people get special treatment for special connections. After you're done with this question, we'll take a break at 10:30. Mr. Peter Xiu, can you save your question for after the break? You can raise this question, or you can sum up what we've talked about. He has provided all his responses. I gave him a clear question. What was your question again? Mr. Ronnie Wong's director of Hoi Tin Swimming Club. And then this seriously injured swimmer was also belonged to Hoi Tin. And Mr. Ronnie Wong is also chair of the HKASA, Deputy Secretary General of SF&OC. And this senior coach of the Hoi Tin swimming coach is also a wife of the sports organizations up there. That's why people in the sports sector are questioning. Is it because Hoi Tin has a special place? And that's why this seriously injured athlete, despite he wasn't in his top form and was allowed to take part in the Asian Games. To be fair to Mr. Ronnie Wong, we should let him give us a response. Honestly, I don't think this is the case. We would have eliminated an athlete if there was a need to do so. Based on the letter we just circulated, this athlete kept training 6 months before the Asian Games. Mr. Ronnie Wong. It's more than just about the injured athlete wasn't training. The athlete was in the process of a therapy. Just answer Mr. Lam's question. There's no point in quoting what's in the letter. The letter was just written. The crux of Mr. Lam's question was that there appears to be a conflict of interest in the roles of the coaches. In your role, you didn't have the information back then. What would you have done had you had the letter back then? I took no part in the decision making regarding this athlete. As you know, I play no part in this. For the nominations from the HKASA, I took no part in the decision making. So I hope Mr. Lam he just shouldn't lump everything together. So your reply was you took no part in the selection process. Or just tell us that piece of information. So I wasn't aware of what criteria were adopted during the selection. Can we do this, Mr. Abraham Chang? When Mr. Wong, the swimmer, was selected, the result is spelled out in documents in the Jan bundle. Can you give us a record? so that we can wrap up this item. Can you give us a record spelling out why Mr. Wong, the swimmer, was selected? Can you read out the information? Mr. Ronnie Wong, you said you played no part whatsoever in the selection process. From the nomination HASI, I wasn't aware of what happened. Can you address your roles one by one? Did you play any part in your capacity at the HKASA? Second, as the chair of the selection committee of the SFOC, correct? Were you any part of the selection process? I recused myself. I didn't play any part in this. Why did you recuse yourself again? I'm the president of the HKASA, so you didn't take part in it. You can just tell Mr. Lam that you didn't play any part. You can't just say no, I didn't take any part. You have to spell out how you were not involved in decision making. Anything to add from you, Mr. Ronnie Wong? No, I played no part in selecting the athletes. Chair, just a couple of questions. I'm going to wrap up at 10:30. Take a break at 10:30, and then you can carry on after the break. Mr. Ronnie Wong, I put this question to you beforehand. Can you, regarding the injured athlete, records about this coach allowing this athlete to go ahead with the games with a doctor's certificate? Can you give us the doctor's certificate to back up the claim you just made? I'm not going to second guess or question the doctor's opinion on this matter. I'm focusing on whether the athlete could go ahead with the Asian Games. You can ask for the doctor's report. Can you give us a doctor's report? And any record about how the coach handled the matter. A serious decision was made after all. Mr. Ronnie Wong, in view of the serious nature of the matter, we will try our best to secure the information, but there may be privacy concerns. Chair, I don't need the sensitive information. I just need the part from a doctor saying that this athlete, despite his injuries, could go ahead with the Asian Games. We need records from the doctor. As I said just then, we will do our best to get the information. Final question for this case. This letter, the coach, Mr. Chen, the two doctors believe that the bones could fuse in 12 weeks. The athlete would then be able to exert himself in 12 weeks. What the doctor is saying that the athlete could do whatever he likes with the training in the 12 weeks or after the 12 weeks. There could be two possible meanings. My understanding is that the athlete should abstain from training in 12 weeks. That's the common sense reading. Mr. Ronnie Wong, did you find out what this statement means with the coach? I'm not a doctor. Mr. Ronnie Wong, you didn't take part in the decision making. Now there may be a conflict of role here. So, Mr. Abraham Chen, can you answer the question? Chair, I'm just relying on this letter alone. I haven't been in touch with the coach, Mr. Chen. Chair, I want him to get in touch with the coach, Mr. Chen. The coach quoted from two doctors. If you just sustain the bone fracture, then you shouldn't be exerting yourself for training. So my reading is that the athlete should have waited for 12 weeks before training, otherwise he would injure himself again. Normally, for the bones and fuse, it takes 10 to 12 weeks. The injury on the 2nd of May, 12 weeks from then, it would be around 3 or 4 months. So the bone would just be fusing by April. A high-intensity sports event. And the doctor said the athlete go ahead to go swimming. We need records clearly spelling out everything. You don't just quote people orally, because it's a serious injury. And then athlete took part in a high-intensity sports competition. Is this even good for the athlete's well-being?
Just very briefly, I think the two members would know, being very good swimmers, that in fact when you swim, 80% of the strength comes from your arms and 20% from your legs. Well, thank you, Mr. Wong. I accept your explanation, but the problem is, it's not about whether anyone has expertise. We're talking about the system itself. We need to have a fair and open system. You've set your own rules, and let's not argue about other things. The point is, we have a system, but you're not following it. Please give me 5 minutes. No. I need to take a break at 10:30. You can continue afterwards. We'll take a 15-minute break.